house or freed a condemned soul. The question welled in his mouth and sank back. Much of what Jasper did would be used by men who already had interests, merchants who needed a forged charter, widows who wanted proof of a husband's debts. Men with little power who thought a learned counterfeit might buy them a voice against those with better paper. Jasper produced a page then, brown around the edges and buckled, with the faint scent of stove char and mildew. He set it on the table with a theatrical hand. "Look," he said. It was the sort of leaf Matthias recognized from his work, a ledger, the columns faint but legible, a seal pressed in the corner. The handwriting was not Jasper's, but that of a man trained to imitate another's script. A careful clerical hand that mimicked the small flourish of a certain scribe Matthias knew by sight. The seal matched a design commonly used by a provincial magistrate's office. A stain wandered across the corner, as if the page had been splashed by a porter years ago. Matthias felt something kick inside his chest. He reached without thinking and his fingers brushed the paper. It was warm from the lamp and paler where his skin had touched. "It's convincing," he said. Jasper laughed. "It should be. We make things for men who pay to be believed. But do you see, convincing is not the same as true. A good forgery tells a plausible story. It fills in what people need to believe." Matthias imagined the men who read the chronicle in the great hall, the rustle of robes, the bright authority of the Empress seal. He imagined a magistrate in a provincial town lifting a page and taking it as final. He imagined a grieving family finding in a single leaf the proof that would drive them from grief to vengeance. Every imagined consequence unspooled before him like a rope. He had come seeking how to show truth. Instead, he was shown how truth could be unmade. "Why show me this?" he asked. "To scare me out of my work? To sell me something I cannot afford?" Jasper's expression softened. "Neither. I show you because you are a scribe who believes in record, and so would be the perfect fool to confess that craft means nothing if a man can produce a lie that pleases more than the truth." Also, he tapped the table with 2 fingers. "Because a man who seeks to unmake a seal should be taught how the seal is made. Otherwise he will shout that he has proof and 100 hands will say it is fake, and he will be left in a courtyard crying, 'I have fed men papers that made them kings. I have also taken a man's savings to make him a false alibi.' I will give you a demonstration so you will know your enemies and their tools." He opened a drawer and took out another leaf, folded into quarters and tied with a thread of red. This was made for a client who wanted to convince his wife's kin that he had paid money long ago in a distant town. The old magistrate was dead and his seal had been taken by his widow. But the widow would not surrender it to the man who sought it. So we made a competent substitute. Matthias listened without moving his hands. He thought of his ledger again of names and payments tied to a betrayal. If a single leaf could be made here and passed elsewhere for a proof of a debt, then a ledger could be framed, discredited, refashioned. His revelation sharpened into a new terror if he brought the ledger forward. Varen's men or any of the Chancellor's allies could make a forged counter-document that would look as old and as official as the real thing, and the people who needed to be convinced would not know which to believe. Worse, a forged denial, placed later and stamped by a known authority, could make Matthias evidence the forgery. "So you make lies for living," he said. The words were flat and small, "But I am not as romantic as you make me sound. I make what men ask for. I do not choose their hearts. The men who ask for absolution or condemnations, they are not my business. My business is craft." Wren brought 2 cups of bitter tea on a tray. Jasper accepted one and did not offer Matthias. "Sit with your tea on the side bench if you mean to be fed the trade's secrets, but eat not the bread of false courage. People make themselves heroic when they have drunk too quickly." Matthias sat on the bench and tried to drink, but the tea tasted of soot and astringent leaves. It steadied him in the way a cool cloth steadies a fever, but it could not dull the new urgency that beat against his ribs. He thought of Edda at the scriptorium. What would she say to this demonstration? She had been skeptical and protective. She had warned him of censors and of the risks of threads pulled too taut. Jasper was not the only man who could provide a forgery. He was the most practiced, perhaps the most dangerous, precisely because his competence gave him no particular commitment to any cause but money and art. "You will not deny that a well-made forgery can topple a reputation?" Matthias asked. "I will not deny it," Jasper said. "And I will not deny that if I wanted to topple a reputation, I would not do it by mere leaf alone. A forgery must be placed. Its provenance must appear natural. A man arrives in a court with it and says he found it in a chest. Another man will say he discovered it in a merchant's warehouse. A third will swear to have seen it under a cushion in an inn. People believe provenance more than text. You will be told the chain and you will bow before it." Matthias felt the floor of his world become ill-defined. The ledger's chain, how it had been misfiled and survived, had seemed to him a breadcrumb trail one could follow. Now Jasper's voice suggested a different logic. Chains could be invented, breadcrumbs dropped for the curious. The truth might be no more than a matter of who could make the better breadcrumb. He thought of his own family, of the way his father had taught him to fold parchment, in the same manner his father had learned to fold it, careful, ritualized. The ledger spoke against that family story. If counter-evidence could be made to look older, to bear the right stains and the right abbreviations, then any revelation Matthias might make could be answered not by argument but by artifice. He left his hands in his lap as if to keep them from reaching for the paper again. Then Jasper surprised him. He slid the tied leaf across the table. "You may take this one home," he said softly. "Not because I trust you," the corner of his mouth went up briefly, "but because you are the sort of man who thinks knowledge without danger is useless. Take it and look. But know this, if you choose to go to the Empress with a truth that she cannot accept, be ready for the retort to be artful. They will buy hands like mine to answer yours. They will place a leaf in the Chronicle and tell the city it has always been so. And your ledger, no matter how honest its hand, will be called a forgery, and you will be the man who faked it to shame his own house." Matthias folded his fingers over the thread. For a moment he was tempted to accept the simplicity of a bargain by a counter-leaf to silence his own conscience. But Kafka had no place here. The ledger's names were not things that could be erased with money. He thought of Sister Unwin's patient faith and of Edda's guarded anger, of the faces of men and women whose names neat columns now sheltered. He felt the ledger beat against his ribs like a small pane of glass. "If I take this to people," he said slowly, "they can point at this and they will say you have been deceived. That this is the sort of thing a scribe might do to undermine a household, to avenge a slight," Jasper finished. "They will call for your dismissal and perhaps your punishment. Or they might reward the man who brings them a leaf that flatters their belief. Always stories are shaped to fit the man who holds the power, Matthias." The lamp burned lower. Night had gathered at the windows, and the room seemed even smaller now that truth had been made to look as fragile and as manipulable as a thing sewn of cotton. Matthias stood up uncertainly. The world outside the door felt unfamiliar. Even the cart that bumped by on the cobbles made a sound that might be mistaken for a warning bell. He slipped the tied leaf into his coat under his left arm as if it could be felt as much as hidden. The quick press of paper was oddly intimate. He had come to Jasper to learn technique. He left with a demonstration in his pocket and a new dread in his chest. The knowledge that a man like Jasper could manufacture the appearance of someone else's life made his ledger more valuable and more vulnerable at once. He had been hoping for a simple way to show the truth. Instead, he had been given a sober lesson. In a city that lived by record, authority could be bought and faked as easily as bread. The ledger's names were human and ragged. Proof could not make them whole again. Outside the lane, the air had cooled. The market smell had dimmed to a background hum. A dog barked and a child laughed somewhere. Matthias paused as if listening, feeling the city like a body around him. He had a forged leaf in his pocket and the misfiled ledger waiting at the scriptorium. He had seen with his hands how a seal could be pressed and how a watermark could be drawn. He knew now that a battle over truth would not be decided by demonstration alone. Opponents could fight paper with paper, truth with an artful lie. He felt, with a sudden clarity, the thinness of his own resources, his curiosity, his small skill with letter forms, his friend's Edda, sister Anwen perhaps. The soldier Ryan in the distance, none of these would, by themselves, be a match for an apparatus that had men like Jasper on call. He folded the satchel's strap over his shoulder and walked back into the thoroughfares. The city swallowed his shape. His breath left the stub of the night like a small white flag, and as he moved toward the scriptorium, his hand kept finding the one place where the forged leaf lay against his ribs and testing whether something could be trusted if it felt as solid as the weight of a man's guilt. He thought of the ledger's names in their neat rows and of the way his own family's story had once been told to him as a thing pure and simple. He thought of Jasper's warning that a better lie could be made to look older than truth. He thought of what it cost to know. He thought of the next morning and of the quiet office where Galen kept his lessons. And his chest tightened because he could not tell, yet, whether knowledge would be the blade that cut away the lies or the thing used to bind him. He walked on, and as the shutters of the city closed, the sound of a distant bell broke somewhere into the dark like an insistence that tomorrow would come and ask for an answer. At the threshold of the scriptorium, where the lamp light pooled and the stone smelled faintly of lemon oil and vellum, Matthias paused. He took the forged leaf from his pocket and looked at it as if it were a living thing. Then he folded it once more and pressed it into the hollow of his palm, feeling the memory of Jasper's hands. He had learned the craft of falsification and the craft's politics. He had learned that proof could be made to bow, and that the ledger's truth, if shown, might be answered not by confession but by an artful lie. The choice he faced, whether to bring the ledger into the light or keep it hidden, suddenly looked less like a moral parable and more like a match lit between two men with different tools. He pocketed the leaf and stepped into the warm lamplight of the scriptorium as if stepping into someone else's story. The door closed behind him, soft as a hush. Outside, the city breathed and the bell tolled again, and somewhere in the night a line was being drawn that might not be visible until flame touched it. Matthias felt, in the particular way learned by men who handle paper for a living, that the world could be held at arm's length if he kept his hands busy. His days were measured in inches of margins, of column width, of the space between one corrected phrase and another, and in those inches the kingdom kept itself together. The chronicle was not merely a history, it was the architecture of rightness, a builder's plan laid out in ink. When one corrected a line, one set a beam in place. The scriptorium was quieter than usual. Winter had pressed its face to the city's narrow windows and left them slightly fogged. Outside the market voices came muffled, as if the whole capital spoke through wool. Inside, the heat from the stoves made the air soft, and the long tables valanced with blotters and inkwells, with weights and knives held its work like a congregation. Lights slanted through high panes and made bright lanes on the tables. Dust, suspended, looked like delicate script. Matthias' ledger lay open between his fingers, a small world of camel-browned pages that smelled faintly of smoke. He had taken it from its misfiled place the night before and kept it hidden beneath a stack of officially condemned pamphlets, pretending, when his master glanced his way, to attend to the chronicle's next emendation. He had told no one. The ledger was a thing that could unravel a life. He read not for the joy of discovery, but as a man reads a wound, to locate the source of the ache and decide whether to press his thumb in and draw blood. There was a knock at the scriptorium's inner door, 3 soft, formal knocks that could have been the discreet punctuation of any routine visit. Galen paused, his pen poised above the chronicle, as if the sound were an editor's query. Matthias looked up, chest tightening in that particular way that men accustomed to keeping secrets feel when others tread near. He had grown used to small incisions, an interruption, a question, a ledger misplaced and returned, but some knocks were portents. Galen's hand moved, a slow gesture of invitation. The door opened inward on a figure who carried the precise weight of military bearing and something else, an edge that was not wholly official. The captain's boots tapped once on the flagstones, and then the sound softened. He removed his gloves with measured fingers and placed them on the table, as if to show he came without disorder. The man was tall, broad in the shoulders, his uniform neat, the scar on his brow a thin white arc that caught the light. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Galen smiled a smile of protocol and introduction. Matthias' throat felt as if it had shrunk. "Captain Harve," Galen said. The name was a formal note. "You are welcome in the scriptorium." "To what do we owe the honor?" Ryan Harve inclined his head with the curve of a man who had spent hours in councils and knew the grammar of rank. His voice, when it came, was low and not entirely military. There was a tenderness to the syllables that embarrassed Matthias, as if the sound exposed an intimacy the old man had not the right to hear. "I have business with the keeper of registries," Ryan said. "Documents, a clarification. I was told the scriptorium might assist." Galen's expression remained a practiced mask of courtesy. He rose and indicated an inner desk. Matthias watched the captain's hands as he moved. They were hands that had held a rifle and a ledger with equal respect. There was an economy to them, short, precise movements and a small trimmer that the captain disguised in the way he set down his gloves. For reasons that had nothing to do with order and everything to do with the human habit of recognizing patterns. Matthias felt the ledger by his own elbow warm, as if the paper itself heard the conversation. Edda sat at a nearby table, her back partially turned, combing through a roll of correspondence. At the sight of Ryan, she did not startle, but a shadow passed across her face like a cloud. She had a way of assessing a room as if it were an index, where the heat gathered, where the damp lay, which conversation might smolder into danger. She closed her paper and moved across with cat-like discretion. "We keep many things here," Galen continued, folding his hands as the captain took a chair. "What sort of clarification do you require, Captain?" Ryan's gaze rested for a fraction of a second on Matthias before he spoke. "I was told you might have records of re-enlistments and pardons from the years after the uprising, lists of names, correspondences with district magistrates. Nothing that is not already in the public register, of course. I thought perhaps to reconcile a list." He could have been asking for any mundane thing, an officer tying loose ends. His politeness was a shield that made questions respectable. But when his eyes found the ledger on Matthias' table, the shield rattled. A drop of silence fell, small and heavy, and in that moment the scriptorium's hum seemed to move away like a tide. Ryan's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion of the men around him, but in the way of a man reading lines of his own life. It was a small thing, the tilt of the ledger, an edge peering from under a blotter, but as the captain looked down he saw a name and his face altered. Matthias had trained himself not to read other men's faces. A scribe who inhabited the world of recorded words must keep the individual in the second plane, a line in the margin, a period, a space. Yet in Ryan's face the change was as legible as ink. For a man who had spent years containing violence only to find it remembered in the scent of a page, the name acted like a trigger. His jaw tightened. For a few heartbeats he was simply a citizen with measured courtesy. Then memory unstitched him. "This is interesting," Ryan said, and his voice had shifted. The syllables were clean, but something behind them had scrapped and come away. "May I see?" Galen hesitated, the way old men hesitate because of rules, and because of the knowledge that rules are sometimes brittle things when they are people who must be judged. Captain, we have a duty to maintain the chronicle and to keep other records in their proper custody. You should submit a request. There are forms. Ryan's look was cautious but resolute. Time is a thing I cannot give for forms, please. Matthias could have moved then and hid the ledger, could have shoved the book into the hollow of his satchel and produced a smile. He was practiced in avoidance. Avoidance was his family's currency, but his hands felt as if they belonged to someone else. The ledger, lying open, slanted its lines toward Ryan like a small altar. For a moment Matthias imagined the ledger might simply be another piece of paper, and yet he felt the room tilt, as if reality had been rearranged to make this meeting inevitable. He pushed the book toward Ryan with a hand that trembled only slightly. "It's misfiled," he said, as if apologizing for a clerical error could soften the import of what lay inside. Ryan's fingers hovered above the page. He did not trace the pen strokes with the rapt curiosity of the scholar. He did not seek authentication or provenance. He read as a man seeking someone he had once known. His breathing shortened, not loud but considerable, and the captain's thumb brushed the margin where a penciled entry curled like a small flame. The name was written there, 2 words, the first a short, plain name and the second more ornate, perhaps a family name stamped with the uniformity of a clerk's hand. For Matthias there was something obscene about seeing it in the ledger, the way a stranger's description of a domestic object becomes intimate when the object belongs to you. He felt as if he had been reading about rooms he had never entered but suddenly recognized as his own. Ryan's eyes misted. It was a small change. The wetness at the rim of the eyelid that no man stationed before the world cared to exhibit. He did not close the book. He said the name aloud slowly, as if testing its materiality. "Ansel Roud," he said. The scriptorium's air flinched at the syllable. To others it might have been just a name, one among many, but to Ryan it was a sequence of days, a camp near the river. Tents collapsing in rain. The smell of a kerosene lamp. A man who whistled when he was nervous and who, once, had made a child laugh with a trick of wooden coins. Ryan's mouth twitched as if such recollection was an old wound being picked at. He felt the winter after the surrender. Ryan continued, words shaping themselves into proof. There was a small convoy. They said it was an escort to safety. They told us the enemy had borne down. But the convoy, some of them never returned. Ansel was one of them. I saw his cap after. Matthias listened and felt the ledger's lines become a map of human flesh. He had known only the archival abstraction, names, dates, payments. His family had told the story in a tone that made survival seem prudential, prudent, necessary. His mother had called it the bargain and never said the names involved. He had imagined bargains as slate-grey deals of necessity. Ryan's memory made them red. Edda moved closer, quiet as the tread of moths. Her hand rested on the table, fingers splayed near the inpot. She did not speak. Her presence was an annotation, not an argument. She watched Ryan's face as if consulting a ledger of its own, where lines creased, where grief made an indentation. "We were told," Ryan began again, and then stopped, as if he had a shelf of argument and could not find the right book. "We were told that those who persisted in resistance were rogues and bandits. We were told to hand over what leaders we had. We were told to keep faith with the crown. I did what I was ordered to do. I thought I was buying my town's security. But Ansel was taken in the night. There were papers. There were payments." He broke off. The captain pressed his palm flat on the table and held it there as if anchoring himself to the scriptorium's solidity. "Payments." Matthias' voice was small. He had practiced the inflections of curiosity, but now curiosity tasted like complicity. Ryan's jaw moved. "Yes, names, sums, dates. The kind of quiet accounting that doesn't fit well in public proclamations. We buried some of the men with no markers. Others simply vanished. I thought perhaps it was the fog of war, the confusion. But this," he tapped the ledger lightly, as if the book itself were a piece of evidence in a case that had not found a prosecutor. This shows dates and payments. It ties people we knew to lists. There are sums paid to officials. That is not clerical habit. That is commerce. Matthias felt his pulse in his throat. Commerce? The word made his mind spit out family stories had been told since childhood with the rhythm of nursery tales how his grandfather had kept their heads and their ink-stained hands. How the family's chance at presentability had always been owed to prudence at the right moment. He had thought of prudence as virtue. Ryan's use of the word dissolved such comforts into arithmetic. Gallen's expression had been schooled into neutrality. Captain, any assertion of impropriety will require corroboration. These papers must be examined, logged, cross-referenced. There is a procedure. Procedure, Ryan echoed, and something like a smile, brittle and private, flitted and was gone. Procedure is what keeps men from acting when they should. Please, Galen. Just read. If it says what I think, then we must know. Matthias realized then that there were many forms of courage, and that Ryan's was not the loud, sweeping kind. It was the small insistence of a man demanding that a record meant what his memory said it did. The captain's voice had the cadence of someone who had not chosen to become sentimental but who found himself called to testimony. He read aloud names, dates, notations placed in the cramped, indifferent clerk's hand. His voice did not tremble much. He had the air of a man who had been drilled to deliver information without ornament. Yet each name tugged at him. Each date pulled a curtain backward. Where Ryan could, he supplied a piece, a place, a circumstance, a face. When he paused, the air filled with the memory his voice conjured, the moan of a wounded horse, the thin laugh of a man who had nothing left but a joke. When he spoke of Ansel's cap, his hands betrayed him and reached instinctively, as if certain objects could reattach him to the past. He laid a glove on the ledger as if to still it. There are others here, he said, and named 2 more men, Karinalv, Sel Toven. Names I have not heard spoken in years. How did these names come into an official record? Matthias made an effort to be useful in the currency he knew best. They were recorded, he said. Entries like this would be lodged with the accounts for payments to mediators, tax levies, pardons. They are often filed under civic remediation. They aren't meant to be public. Why would they list names and sums? Ryan asked. Why would a ledger note that a man named Ansel received, or more accurately, was associated with a sum at a date following a surrender? To account for transfers, Galen supplied. To balance ledgers, to show that resources were allocated, to show what was paid to whom when bodies went missing. Ryan's voice had a sharpness now, a clarity that came from fury edged by grief. To show how some men bought safety for themselves at the cost of others. Silence folded the scriptorium between its tables. The sound of the outside city bells, haggling voices, the thud and faraway clatter of a cart fell away. Within, paper and breath and the faint tick of a clock were all that remained. Matthias imagined his mother hearing the word betrayal and folding it away. He imagined the ledger's entries as the bones of a story he had been told in childhood versions, where culpability was softened into necessity. But the ledger did not do softness. It made arithmetic and placed it beside names. The arithmetic had teeth. What do you want? Matthias asked. The question was practical because all conversations in the scriptorium yielded to the practical eventually. There were ways of dealing with documents, ways of submitting petitions, ways of redacting information. He framed the question in forms he understood. Ryan looked at him for the first time as though seeing him clearly. There was something searching in his look. I want to know whether the men listed here were given a chance to surrender and were then transferred to someone who collected on them. I want to know whether the men arrested and handed over, whether the ledger tells of arrangements that were not lawful. If it does, then this is not simple accounting. It is evidence. It changes culpability. Matthias felt the ledger warm beneath his fingers. He had been prepared for questions of authenticity, for the cold mechanics of proof. He had not been prepared for the request that meant action legal, moral, violent. The ledger ceased to be an object to be catalogued and became, all at once, a fulcrum. If this is true, Ryan went on, then there are consequences. Not merely